Hi, good afternoon. I'm Andy Rothram. I'm a co-founder, senior partner at Bellwether. I'm joined by three absolutely fantastic panelists. I'm really excited for this discussion. You'll hear from them in a moment. We have current Secretary of Education in Indiana, Katie Jenner, who's also, in addition to her work there, is a national leader. She was recently on the BPC Workforce Commission and does a number of things outside of Indiana to drive this issue forward. Melody Shop, who's a former state chief in South Dakota, was president of the Council of Chief State School Officers, has worked in the private sector at SAS, is now at Metametrics, who we partnered with on this project, and also a national leader. And then Todd Truitt, who may not be known to all of you, but should be. Todd is a parent in Virginia. I think that's his most important job. But what he also was instrumental in the work in Virginia on redesigning the accountability system, raising standards, and just as a parent activist, in his home community in Arlington, which is in the northern part of the state, but it would come down to Richmond for state board meetings and give a parent perspective on what was going on, and it was enormously valuable and informative for that work. And so you'll be hearing from them in a moment. Couple of things real quickly for those of you, if this is your first one of these with us. We're a national nonprofit. We work with a range of organizations. I don't want to hit you over the head with a lot of propaganda. You can go to our website and see what we do, direct service work in the field. We also do a lot of field-facing work. That includes things like webinars and programming like this. I'll ask Mackenzie to put our link, and you can see where you can sign up for our newsletter. You can follow our work in a number of ways. You can read EduWonk, and you'll hear about these kinds of events. We also have some topic-specific newsletters on things like AI. You can ask questions if you're listening to this live. Just put them in the comment, and I'm going to keep an eye on that, and we're going to try to come back to questions, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. But if you have to leave early or you're watching this later, you can, as soon as we're done, it will live on LinkedIn in its entirety, so you can watch it all or in part. The only disadvantage of that is you won't be able to ask questions. Often you'll see in the chat, like, people will start a conversation. That's great. And sometimes the panelists will engage on that and continue to engage afterwards. So what we're going to talk about today, we just put out a paper last week called the Proficiency Confusion. It happened at the same time the NAEP results came out, and there's a lot of attention on that. I think everybody watching this probably knows states use different assessments, and proficiency, what it actually means, can vary. State to state, it can be confusing, and what our paper looked at is that confusion, just how much it actually varies across states, and what we can do to have some common measures. But Todd, since you're a professional parent, I'm going to go ahead and start with you. How have you just experienced navigating the different tests and scores and information that you get as a parent thrown at you? How do you and how do your fellow parents in Virginia, how do they navigate that?
No, thank you, Andy. And I just want to add too that I've written on state assessments, as well as about screeners. I served on our state assessments committee, and so and one disclaimer that these are my views, not the views of my employer. So, but yeah, I mean, I think that like you're total nerds about these things, like myself and some other parents. I mean, that's not really the issue. They're going to inhale this information, digest it. What I've learned the most is just talking to normie parents, like at the sports fields and everything. And I mean, I think when you're talking about proficient, right away, like that term is extremely confusing. Nobody uses that outside of the education space as to proficient. So you see a number of states use things like meets expectations, things of that are more clear. Unfortunately in Virginia, we've been using this term pass. That's like the lowest cut scores, but in the country. But one thing that we're doing next year is moving to a 100-point scale, which I love personally, because parents understand the 100-point scale. That is what they grew up on. And like in Virginia, we have a 600-point scale, which really works for PhD quants and things of that nature, but it really doesn't work for your regular parent. States spend enormous amounts of money on these tests, and the message they're sending is very important, but the language that it's being portrayed in with numerical scores that don't make sense, and sometimes labels that don't make sense, is really kind of perplexing at times.
And I think like often, like, and this was a problem in Virginia, like people see pass and they think that means one thing in terms of college readiness, career readiness, or they see proficient, and often these things aren't even, these terms aren't even aligned. Katie, you've got like a different set of things on your plate, which is, there is nuance here as you think about how you want to measure school performance and what do you want that to look like. And so you've got like, a technical side, and how do you measure this effectively? How do you report it? So talk about, you heard what Todd said, that it's confusing, there's different things, but from the state perspective, and you're somebody, you want to be transparent. You're a state that's trying to do that. Like, but how do you balance those? How do you balance those things? And where are some of the tensions that maybe people don't fully appreciate that someone in your role has to wrestle with?
Yeah, well, first of all, I could not agree with Todd more on the confusion of assessments. I am also a professional parent, as an educator as well. I have.
I'm a decided amateur, but
yeah, it really is. It feels
maybe
amateur
one day I'll go pro.
I love that. It feels amateur most days. That's more like it, especially with 16-year-old twin girls. It really feels amateur. But no, I think what he shared was correct. I mean, most parents just want to know, like, is my kid hitting the mark? And if they're not, what can I do to help? And if I can't help, like, what does that mean for my child ahead? I really like the idea, and I jotted it down, and we'll be texting my team later about the 100-point scale. Because I do think the 650 or the 800 or what we use is, it is confusing for parents. The other thing at a state level that we face is, in this report, I think hits on it, but every state assessment is unique. So I learn in Indiana, which is what we give grades 3 through 8, is more aggressive. It's more rigorous than some of our neighboring states. But when parents or economic development leaders or businesses, mayors see, well, this state has 80% of their kids proficient in ELA, and we have this many. Why is that, right? People just don't understand how every state is different. And I hope we're assessing something very similar, but we often point to NAEP as the best comparison. But even the average parent doesn't know what NAEP is. They may see the headlines, but that's really, to Todd's point, us as policy wonks, we know what that is. But the average parent and family, I think we have to make it easier. And I sure hope we're going to discuss this later on, but proficiency and assessment is essential. In Indiana, I mean, we're going to continue to focus on ELA and math, as well as we've added science and social studies into our accountability model. And at the high school level, we're also looking at additional outcomes that we believe really, really matter. We're hearing that loud and clear from business and industry. We're hearing it loud and clear from parents and families. So again, Andy, I think we have a lot of improvement we need to do on assessments throughout our country.
Okay, so I want to pause. I want to come back in just a sec to the Indiana waiver, because this is the day after your waiver was just approved by the department. But let's just hold on this proficiency thing for a minute. Because Katie, I do think like something that it can be confusing, but I wrote today in a blog post, I'll ask Mackenzie to put it up, like talking about this. I think professionals in the field can sort of make the comparisons. They can see how states benchmark against NAEP, and they can sort of see, okay, that state, has pretty low standards. So the fact that like most kids are proficient, that's not necessarily so meaningful. That state has more ambitious standards, so we should factor that in. I feel like something that both you and Todd have hit on is this issue, though, that the average parent, they don't know what NAEP, they're not benchmarking on NAEP. They're not. So I feel like we often talk about this, like policymakers can't tell. And I don't think that's the case. I think it's the kind of people we need to engage. I think a minute ago, you were talking about like a business leader, a chamber of commerce leader, something. Parents, I think it's those people who are sort of left out of the conversation. Does that resonate?
It absolutely resonates. I can't tell you how many hours I spend on conversations like this, day in and day out. Usually I'm at the state capitol in Indianapolis or driving around. But when I'm out in communities, like I live in Southern Indiana, or when I'm out in communities, yeah, I mean, people glaze over when we start to talk about some of this at best. So I think we have to find a more approachable way to not only talk about it, but again, let's keep the main thing the main thing. What parents care about is, where is my child? How do I ensure they continue to get better? And sometimes we overcomplicate it. So absolutely, it's the Main Street American that we have to start focusing on.
Yeah, and we can come back to that. Yeah, go ahead, Todd.
I'm sorry to interrupt, and I want to let Melody talk, but I just wanted to add something on the 100-point scale, because it is pretty common sense. But I was on the assessments committee, and we hired a top subcontractor, our being our state did, for the top national psychometrician. And she was just objecting to me left and right about it. So it's just not enough nuance. And I'm like, you know, at the end of the day, their concern was really about the nuance for the schools and the state, not for parents. And one of the major ed policy thought leaders in our legislators, Schuyler von Valkenburg, I was talking to him about it. He's like, just add a couple of decimal points to 100 if you need more nuance. Like, that's what parents can understand. And then talking about the two different standards, I live 3 miles from Maryland. It's like right over there. My child, like a child can get a 70, the equivalent of like 77% on our exam, or let's say that it would be basically the score just right over the Brit 3 miles away would be 40 points lower, just because of those 3 miles. How do I know that? Because a curriculum leader in Northern Virginia, who's a neighbor, mentioned, he's like, boy, Maryland does so much worse. Montgomery County, Maryland does on their state on scores than we do. You know, our academics are just so much stronger here. I'm like, did you look at the NAEP scores? I was like, so even a curriculum leader for a major Northern Virginia school district did not know about this difference on cut scores. So.
All right, but Todd, I did not invite you on this webinar to talk up Maryland. But no, I think that's an important point. We're going to come back to this issue of anchoring with Melody, but Katie, why we're on it, because like this is the day after your waiver was just approved, so I feel like I want to ask you about that. I'm just we're talking about transparency. You were just talking about communication. The critique of it has been, I think Denise Ford at the Ed Trust has probably been the most vocal on this. She says, Indiana's plan, I'm quoting, a plan appears to vary standards across student groups in a way that will allow the state to say everyone is just doing fine, and that it, in her words, limits transparency and accountability. Can you just respond to that and talk about like what you're trying to do with this waiver beyond the programmatic flexibility with the funds, what you're trying to do on this reporting and accountability side?
Yeah, I honestly, I've thought about this a lot because I respect Denise. I almost wish we could release our letter grades tomorrow and people see like, wow, they were rigorous. I mean, I've tried to prep people. Our letter grades are going to go down. They're going to be lower than we've ever seen them in Indiana. We did in the accountability model grades 3 through 8 use not only our typical I Learn ELA and I Learn math, but we also again pulled in some other assessments. We're looking at WIDA for our EL students. We're looking at I Learn social studies, I Learn science, etc. Trying to really understand how every single child is doing across a number of different areas. Some of the criticism has come in the high school space where Indiana's federal assessment is the SAT, and the SAT is one component that we can, look at proficiency for sure, but we also have a number of other outcomes that really matter for students in terms of social and economic mobility, which is what we're after in Indiana. In terms of the student population data, I would encourage anyone and everyone to go to indianagps.com. You can see every single school in our state. I think we're the only state where even non-public schools, charter schools, traditional public, you can see data, state assessment data for all school types. And then there's an advanced feature where you can see all the different student populations. And you can look at everything from race and ethnicity to socioeconomic status to special education to EL. And pretty soon we're going to be adding gender. So we're trying to be as transparent as we can be. We're trying to be as rigorous as we can be. But also to the earlier conversation with Todd, and I'm constantly challenged. Our Speaker of the House, Todd Houston, says this to me all the time. He's like, Katie, quit talking like an education wonk and talk like you're speaking to the mom in Jennings County, Indiana. And I think, again, that goes to like, if we're going to move the needle in our country, in our state, it has to be educators plus parents and families. And we're speaking different languages right now. So the final thing I'll just share to that, I think I've proven this over and over again as I'm going on my 6th year here in Indiana. We are very, very quick to be as nimble as possible in terms of like, if we recognize something's not going the way that we want, we are very quick to pivot. Even as a state bureaucracy, we are very quick to pivot for kids if it means doing better for kids. And we'll be watching this data closely, as I'm sure everyone in America will be too. But I just hope that Jennings County mom is watching it the closest, because that's who we really need, the parents and families in our state to lean in with us.
And that's a great segue to Melody. I just want to say, I think an issue here that comes up is we have fantastic state chiefs in some places, and I've heard people say, well, I like a system like this, I don't have any problem with Katie doing it, but they worry about, we basically, the 3 chiefs who have had waivers approved are all pretty strong, well-respected chiefs, Louisiana, Iowa, and now you. And people sometimes worry about, well, what's going to happen when it's somebody else? What's going to happen in a different place? And I think that's a sign of kind of where we are as a sector, that we talk about these things often as with like the person is sort of considered part of the policy rather than more structural. I mean, you're one person, you can't do anything about that per se, but I think it's an issue that I think we have to as a field be attuned to. Melody, let's segue, because I think something that's come up. So Todd talked about Schuyler, who's a leader here in Virginia in the state Senate, saying, add 2 decimals. And that I think is a natural, like, what are we doing? Like, let's make this accessible. And there's always this tension between the psychometricians who want to get it just so, and then the need to be able to communicate this, do it at scale. And you don't want to be cavalier about the measurements or sloppy, but at the same time, at the end of the day, it does matter, as Katie was just saying, okay, what is that mom in Jennings County? How does she make their tales of this? So talk about like what Lexiles are and how they help with this, because the part of it that has appealed to me and why we were excited to work with you on this project is it is anchored in real life stuff. So we're not just saying proficient or pass. We're saying, here's what your kid can do, like in terms of math, in terms of apply the kinds of things. Here's the kinds of things they can do or can't do in reading. They might get scammed because they can't read a financial document. They can't read like a safety message in the workplace or whatever. And that, in my experience, makes these debates much more granular when people actually see that. So talk about, it takes it from the abstract to like real practical applications in life. So talk about the tools you bring and the role that you see them playing here.
Yeah, first of all, Katie, really admire what you're doing. I mean, that's big work, and you're bound to get pushback, but keep on going. So, hey, I've got something over the 3 of you. So I'm not only a parent, but I'm a grandparent. So it's amazing how, it really comes all the way around and becomes even, I'd say, as important, if not more important, when you start looking at, where your grandchild is in this whole conversation. But so when we talk about the Lexile and Quantile Framework, and we're really talking about moving from what I would call labels to this objective developmental scale. And here's what transparency actually achieves. So alongside, and Kate, you stated this, so alongside that important proficiency or pass, Todd, you call that in Virginia, labels, determined at state level, which is important. We have a measure, and it provides us what I like to call the national currency. So what it does, it's helpful to think of that Lexile framework as a common ruler. So it exists independently of any single test, which again, I think you stated too, Katie, that tests are unique and we still need to have them for all purposes. So some background on Metametrics. We have over 35 million students who get a Lexile score through either their state assessment or some interim assessment in all 50 states. So you can see how broad the Lexile measures are across the country. And we partner with 19 states, and they actually report Lexiles out along with their state assessment data. So, that's an important piece. But we also have over 300,000 books through publishers and online sellers and so forth that have been given Lexile measures. So that's an important piece I'm going to talk about later when we connect the two. So when a student takes their state assessment, or they might take an interim assessment, they're effectively, it's like stepping on a scale is how I like to think about it. Because here's what happens behind the scenes. So Metametrics, we work with a test provider, a publisher, we work with the states, and we mathematically link the assessment to the Lexile and the Quantile scales. And because of that linkage, the test doesn't just produce a state-specific score. It calculates a Lexile measure for reading and a Quantile measure for math. So they get the score, which is valuable, and we've been doing that for a long time. But here's what's a little bit different. So if a student is taking a high-stakes test, let's say in South Dakota, where I live, or if they're taking an assessment in Indiana, the resulting measure on that assessment is a measure on the same developmental skill. So that skill, and why it's so powerful, it allows that parent or a policymaker or an education chief to really be able to understand and see that growth over time. And it doesn't matter what test they took, regardless of that. And so here's where I like to think about it as being the double duty score. I know I think it's so powerful. So every time a student takes one of those linked assessments, whether it's interim, state assessment, whatever they have, they get that measure. And it does two things for them that are really important. It tells us the level of the material that the student is currently able to learn. And that's important because that's what we want to know. But also it describes the material. So it allows us to match that to students, to books, to articles, to math concepts, and they're perfectly aligned with that specific development measure. So instead of just giving that broad grade level or a pass or proficiency, it's very specific, and it really helps to break down that barrier for what parents are looking for.
I think the key thing you said there, one key thing is this issue of linked. So this can be embedded in other assessments that students are taking. This is not, so there's often a lot of concern you hear, I don't want another test laid on. Like this is linked and crosswalk. Do you want to just help people understand who aren't familiar with this, what that looks like?
So our linking studies takes into account assessments that are already there. So whether it's the national or whether it's a state assessment that is being given or an interim assessment, we're linking onto those current assessments. Students don't take any more tests. They already have those measures embedded within that state assessment. And I think that's always a concern for all of us. I know it'd be a concern for you, Katie, as well. And also as a parent, you don't want your student to have to take more tests, but there's already embedded into that. So when the state assessment is given and when the score is given, the Quantile and the Lexile measures are calculated based on that specific assessment. And it really helps to, again, equalize those measures across the country.
Todd, how does this land as a parent? Like in terms of the utility of this? And I know like a lot of parents use it, like they're excited to see the Lexile levels, Melody was saying, just with books. And so they can help kids like get to more, push them towards more advanced books as they're becoming more successful readers. But so you can talk about in that context and just as a tool around education accountability.
Yeah, and those parents don't really give me any worry. I mean, I know that they're going to take that information and digest it. It's really go back to the normie parents, like, and put it in. I love this idea. I haven't actually seen it, but of really putting it in a plain language to your normie parent that maybe works two jobs. Like maybe it really, they want their kids to succeed as well. And I just want to say that, fortunately, college for all is pretty much dead, at least here in Virginia, in terms of our new system. But math and reading are crucial, not just if you're going to college. Like my family owns, I have family that owns a small plumbing business in Indiana. I mean, they use geometry and algebra every single day. And so that is a crucial skill. But I would say, just going back to the practical again, we talked about the 100-point scale, but let's talk about making sure that documents actually get to the parents. I personally think mailing those results is crucial. We were making sure they're going to the parents. So our district was not sending school report cards home. The percentage of parents that never saw those was very, very high. And you can imagine the demographic skew of it. So, we can make the reports as great as possible, but if they're actually not landing in the hands of parents, then, you're really missing out on a lot of valuable information.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll pick on your district. My kids are now out of, went through Virginia Public Schools, but I was in your district for a while, and they were terrible about just basic communication in some cases. I remember one instance where they sent a survey out online asking if you wanted to get materials by paper or online, and then use that as a result. And of course, like, this was a Title I school. You were missing a lot of families that weren't getting their material online and needed it translated. But they had this like online survey, and that was considered somehow like a definitive way to ascertain parents' preferences on receiving material. So there's a long way to go. And I think one thing all kinds of schools resist in some cases different efforts at transparency and so forth. And we should talk honestly about that. We've talked about like all the tests students take, but that sort of fuels a little bit the politics. I mean, you guys know this, and Katie, you're of everybody on the call, you're living it the most acutely right now. Like educational change is difficult. You get people like there's and frankly, it's like moving a graveyard. You don't necessarily get a lot of support from the inside either. And so the politics are tough. Would measures like this start to like help ease some of the politics, because they would put it into terms that the average normie could also get their head around? And I'm thinking about two things recently. One, the San Diego math thing, I think that hit really hard, the San Diego State math, when people, because it wasn't just like, oh, college kids, they're not doing math in generic, they're not proficient. It was people saw these problems and were like, oh, wait a minute, you should be able to do that if you're going to college. And then in Virginia, a very powerful moment was when the state police came in around the standards and were like, these standards aren't high enough. You have to rate if you want like these. And so to Todd's point, it's not just about college and so forth. It's like, if you want to be a trooper, here's the level of some of the stuff you need to be able to do that you guys are undershooting. So those are like real world applications. Do you think it would help with some of these politics where often it sounds like education people just arguing with themselves about our standards high enough and stuff? It would start to change some of those politics.
Yeah, I think Lexiles, I mean, there's something that have been around for a long time, probably when most of us were in school, maybe Lexiles were there. But again, sometimes I think we battle, in addition to making sure our parents understand the data, like Todd mentioned the 100 scale. Our parents said loud and clear, we need infographics. We don't understand all the charts and graphs you use. Give us something to better understand infographic. The other thing that I think we're facing that we don't talk a lot about in terms of the politics of some of this is how much do some of our parents care about some of this data? Todd cares, I care, Melody cares, Andy cares deeply. I'm not sure if I walk down Main Street of the town that I live in right now and I was like, let me tell you about the I-Learn scores in math and where we are proficiency. And I can bring a lot of energy and salesmanship to it. I think we have to start asking those questions on what does the Lexile mean to the average parent? We have to build trust around what that measure is, make it easy for them to understand, make it easy for them to see the progress. As Todd mentioned, make sure it actually does get in the parents' hands. The other politics with this conversation, and you're probably going to go there, I thought you were going to go there, Andy, is around who takes the assessment. And what I'm about to say is not very popular with some, but again, I don't hold back. I'm very comfortable saying it. But in Indiana, we are really, really proud of the fact that our parents can see the data for every single school type in our state: traditional public, charter, non-public. And so some of the politics that are also seeping in more so now than ever are, who should be taking assessments? Should certain school types have different assessments? Should certain school types have any assessment at all? That's where I feel the political pressure right now, as much as anything when it comes to this conversation.
I want to stay on we're going to talk about that choice piece in just a second. But Todd, just to you, and then Melody, your experience, do you think, Todd, in Virginia, do you think you'd have more parents? You literally got up in the morning and drove down 95, which I wouldn't wish on anybody, to come talk to the state board about raising standards and why it matters. Do you think more people would be like, okay, I get this, if we were talking about it in more plain English rather than a debate about high or not high enough or proficient, if this was grounded in like much more clearly in real world applications for whatever you want to do after high school, whether it's college, whether it's enlisting in the service, or whether it's employment, straight to employment? Like, if it was just more concrete, do you think that would help? You're always going to get the institutional resistance, the political resistance. That's a fact of life. But do you think it would change the politics some, that it would sound maybe a little less like angels dancing on the head of a pin to leaders in Virginia?
Well, I think that, I take two things. I think if the test data, and talking about Lexiles and Quantiles and putting it in real world context, was more, the test results were more kind of digestible by parents, then they would value the tests more. Right now, a lot of times they're finding out their kids are taking these days of tests, and the parents aren't getting anything that they can understand unless they have like a PhD. And they're not getting any, a lot of them are not getting any value of this. So I think that's first. I think Katie raised a great issue too about kind of, do parents want all of that data? That's why I'm very, very big on summative scores, like summative school ratings, very important. Summative test scores as well. Even at our elementary school level, we were getting these standards-based gradings. Nobody could understand them. Like, even people that have advanced degrees, especially our English learner parents, could not understand them. Because why? They did not have a summative score. So, and I think with, in terms of, you can give somebody a summative score on the test, and then kind of filling in the details as to what that means as to their readiness for college or career or whatever it is. I think parents would find that extremely valuable versus the status quo. I personally think that some of the institutions would prefer that this information not be valuable to people. This provides an outside check onto local school districts. And it's not popular with some of the institutions, some of the adults that run these institutions. So,
can I jump?
Oh yeah, I was going to come to you. Yeah,
you just made me think about that, Todd, because I think when we're thinking about how Lexile measures could actually do what you're talking about, if they truly are a universal yardstick, they can work across any school or state. But what's going to be important for a parent, and maybe this is what I'm thinking about too, Katie, when you're talking about that. If we can translate that abstract performance, whether, what do we call it in each state, into really that tangible skill. So it's one thing to tell a parent, your student, your child is proficient. But if we can tell a parent, or if we say they're approaching proficiency, whatever that means, instead, if we can show them, if a student is currently ready to interpret, let's say, a technical manual that's required for a career in manufacturing, that they need this basic mathematical foundation that's necessary to be successful in a complex student loan agreement or whatever it's going to be, then it's tangible. Then the parent can say, oh my goodness, I really need to help my student. If they have something really tangible, because just approaching a certain proficiency level or a passing level, what we want to be able to try to do with this measure is give something that is really tangible by actually showing them, are they at that appropriate level? So I agree with you both. I think the parents maybe would care more if they actually knew what it meant.
And I would, Melody, the tangible, it's the college and career readiness, like Todd mentioned, but we're even having parents and families of an 8th grader say, well, my child really wants to go to the Naval Academy, or my child really wants, name whatever parent dream you might think of, right? My child really wants to be in information technology and work for Grody Industries, or whatever. I mean, and parents are dreaming big for their kids. Hopefully that's what we want. But does the Lexile even connect with that? Like, are you on track to be prepared for whatever your said career interest might even be? I mean, as a parent of soon to be junior daughters, my gosh, I would love that. I think one wants to be a teacher. I think one may want to go in the medical field. And even if as the Secretary of Education who pushes, I'll have questions about their preparedness in some areas. So I think something like that would be helpful, even more granularly than we're talking.
So we have mapped right now, we've mapped performance to career entry level demands. And we've done that with over 600 some careers, and they span everything. Not talking about just college. We're talking about those entry level career demands for whether it's military or whether it is career and technical education, profession going forward, that is really valuable. So when we're looking at, what a student's interest is, it's always great to have those interest surveys, but if they don't actually know what the demands are that. So exactly what you talked about, Katie, that we are able to provide Lexile scores that can really map to those demands beyond, and then help the student to really have good, and the parent to have great information about, is your student actually prepared to manage that at that entry level.
So I want to, two things. I want to remind people watching, go ahead and get your questions and we're going to start getting to those. So please start putting those in the chat. I'm seeing them come in. But first, I want to double click, as the consultants say, on Katie's point around, which was basically about choice. And one of the things, and I wrote about this today on EduWonk, one of the things I'm excited about this is you can use this, Lexiles can be used across any kind of schooling setting, and actually homeschoolers can use them. They can be used in any kind of education setting. And we don't have a lot of universal metrics like that. And you've got this, Katie, you staked out, I think, an important place on assessment, and kids should be taking assessments, but that is not a ubiquitous position. And we've had this fight to try to regulate schools into doing that, but a lot of them are not. We have this tax credit that's going to start coming online next year. That's going to be enormous. If it looks like the way they're regulating it. I mean, billions and billions of dollars to support kids going to different kinds of schools. No way to measure for their parents to really assess whether or not they're learning if a school doesn't want to offer those assessments. So let's talk about this in this context of this incredible, since 2020, when sort of trust was kind of broken and you really started to see an acceleration of demand for choice options. How does this fit in, this issue of having a universal yardstick, universal measurement, addressing this confusion about proficiency and so forth across schools in a choice saturated environment? What are the opportunities? And Katie, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, well, I suppose it is, we again right now use the iLearn assessment as our federal assessment and the SAT at the high school level, but are getting an increasing number of people reaching out because they want to use their assessment in our state in some way. For usually, again, it depends on school type. And so having these measurements that could be used across, regardless of what assessment, I think could be incredibly helpful. So I'm very intrigued with the opportunity there. And Melody, even after, I'll share with you some of the other assessments that we're even looking at, although they're probably already on your radar.
Todd, how did this land with you? I mean, Virginia's obviously a more choice constrained state, but even there, we're starting to see more, more pressure for the, you know, there's certainly some private micro schools that have opened up, and there's some demand there. Virginia actually had a scholarship program even pre this new tax credit one. Like, how do you see this in terms of as parents start to think about their kids moving across, even, you know, where you live, and I live right nearby, there, you know, there's a fairly high saturation of private schools around here. So how do you perceive this issue of having a measure that parents could have access to regardless of the setting that their kids are in?
No, and I think it's very a ripe issue with the federal tax scholarship and the decision whether to opt in or not. You know, Virginia is one of like just a few states that has a very, very strict provision in its constitution about local districts controlling the schools. And so that has made it such that to have charter schools in Virginia, it has to be authorized by the local districts. As you can imagine, most local districts don't want to authorize a charter school. So I think we have 8 in the entire state. But we do have this private choice scholarship tax credit, which actually expires at the end of next year. So we'll see how if we're going to continue the opt-in under the governor. But I always use Indiana, having grown up in Indiana, as an example of when I'm talking to people, because I am a Democrat, I am for opting in because like there's just so much money that's going to be on the table, and a lot of it can be used for public school students too. But I also use Indiana as an example for the fact is that I'm a believer that if private schools are going to be getting money, they should be getting tested as well. And so, and I think it relates to the comparability things as well. And it's interesting because I just find it intellectually dishonest on my end to be for tough school accountability on the public side and not on the private side. And I hear, well, the market will take care of it. And I just think that there's an imperfection in the market, and it goes back to our whole conversation of the indigestibility of all of this data that's put out by schools. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at on this issue. And I think it relates to the whole testing issue, but I understand things could evolve. I think in Virginia, accredited schools private schools do a nationally normed test like Iowa. Maybe that could, spit out something like the Lexiles and Quantiles related to it. But at this moment, I think the safest route for parents is for there to be testing of any private school that's getting federal dollars as well.
Melody, talk about that. And how is Metametrics? How are you guys perceiving? You're a player in our sector, and you're seeing this unbundling too. How are you perceiving this?
Yeah, so the issue is exactly, I think, what you're talking about, Todd. That the more fragmented we are, it makes it really difficult for parents to compare school A to school B. They may be using different assessments or not at all. But so I'm going to wear 2 hats. I'm going to first put on my old hat as former Secretary of Ed. I'm not where you are, Katie, in different time completely, but I really felt it was important at that time, and I think you probably do too, for states, for my state at that time, to determine our own standards, our assessments, our curriculum. I mean, we are, each state is unique in its own way. And it was important to have that state assessment in place for compliance, accountability, for all those reasons that we had within that. And so it didn't always give the information, though, to parents that they needed and wanted. So that's when I put on my Metametrics hat, because I believe that rather than forcing every state or school to use the same test, we should advocate for this universal measure, which is exactly what we do. There's common measure of Lexiles, of Quantiles, and when we use a common research-backed metric like a Lexile measure, we can allow that universal language or learning to be comparable. And that is really the bridge that we see that enables us to report on student growth and proficiency across all those different settings, whether it's internally within a state or even across state lines. So that's where we come in. We walk into the picture that we believe that universal measure gives that appropriate opportunity.
I want to get some questions from the audience. We got one. So this is like old home day for Chiefs. Catherine Truitt is here, who now is advising at ETS, but was previously a fantastic state secretary of education in North Carolina. And she was just asking, like, how do people feel about, like, should we be saying grade level versus proficient? And I would, that's her question, grade level versus proficient. I would add to that, or both of those, like, terms that people really can't make sense of.
Yeah, I can take that because I've written on that issue before, because we're in the process of raising our cut scores to NAEP proficient. Possibly, we'll see what the new administration does. It's over a 3-year period. But I think that if you read back as to NAEP proficient, I love the debate between Tom Lovelace versus Checker Finn. Checker Finn's all for NAEP proficient being set as aspirational. Tom Lovelace said, I like my proficiency definition, like I like my weather, accurate. And so that's why I'm a big believer in, it drives me nuts to see these headlines in the newspaper, like 70% of kids can't read on grade level. And it's like, NAEP proficient is not grade level. So I'm a big believer that we need new terms, because I don't think that these terms are working. I think they're misleading to the general public. And I know a number of states have much better terms. I think Massachusetts has meets expectations, exceeds expectations, but I just don't like these great, like proficient, NAEP proficient. That debate is just really gone off the rails.
Yeah, and there's that adds to, Todd's right. I mean, that adds to the confusion. I'd say even the words that we choose in the state, all of you probably, the words that we choose in the state still don't often make the headlines. It's still misinterpreted there as well. But something to, by the way, hello, Catherine. Thanks for the question. She brings up a really good point about grade level. I think our future desire is to get more to a competency level mastery on, like, what are the skills you need in first grade, and what skills do you hit versus what skills do you not, knowledge skills. So I think it's a question that absolutely deserves debate, as in addition to the debate that Todd threw out with the aspirational test score versus the real proficiency. I think both need a lot of discussion.
There's a comment here. I'm going to quote it. Black parents and other parents of color also have questions and concerns about equity issues related to the test itself and what it means for their child and how their school is measuring up. End quote. Talk about that, because that to me, that's always been, like, in my entire career, that's been like I mean, that was the reason we ended up moving towards more No Child Left Behind style disaggregated accountability, is because it was masking the performance of a lot of kids. We're still fighting that fight in some states because there's other ways to continue to mask that with, subgroup sizes and so forth. So talk about, just as three people involved in this, just very briefly, like, what are the equity implications, and how do they link to what we're talking about today with this kind of measure?
Well, I'll jump in really quick because I do think that by using or giving parents and educators a reliable compass, universal measure, et cetera, and when we standardize those metrics, we're not just labeling students, we're empowering them, and then we're giving parents a really clear and honest view of a student's, whether it's a growth trajectory, their ability towards future goals. So I do think having that universal measure that is, doesn't live within just a state line, that gives us some way that we can do that. It is really speaking to the equitable, and I like the measurement thing. Actually, we're not measuring students, but equitable understanding of where students are within the trajectory itself. So I do think that is a piece of the equity conversation.
Well, I mean, I think it's important to remember the original Robert Kennedy. So, brother Jack Kennedy, who was assassinated in '68, he was, during his time in the Senate, he was dogmatic and very tenacious on, we had to have assessments. You could see how kids were doing. You could see what was happening and so forth. And I mean, he sounded like, this was, before many, most of today's reformers were born, but he was talking about those same kinds of themes and why we needed that. He was, as a New York senator, animated about that. We're coming up on time. I think it's a great question to end on. Somebody asked, they said, if you take a look at NAEP, you see that we, low levels of proficiency. And I think the debate Todd referenced between Checker and Tom Lovelace is a really good one in terms of different ways to think about that. But you have we have a low percentage of kids proficient when you break it out by race and income, many fewer kids proficient in those categories. But then when you look, at developed countries, we're kind of middling, we're in the middle. So like, how do you all, and I think this is just a great question, how do you all characterize kind of where we are? Is this a crisis? Is this something where we just need to do better? Or is this like things are actually going much better than people realize?
I can take that. I mean, I think that I'm bullish on it because of the science of reading movement. The kind of really depolitization from reading things of 25 years ago, of reading wars versus that became completely politicized to nowadays, where you have the NAACP in Northern Virginia was very, very strong on advocating such that in our district, we adopted the science of reading before there was even a state law. So there seems to be, in looking at the results from Mississippi, I know it wasn't clear. There's a number of different factors, but I'm bullish that we've agreed upon the tools and the goals to do so. A lot of it came from great, strong state leadership, but yeah, I mean, I think that I'm just naively optimistic. So, but
I lied. Oh, go ahead, Katie, please.
So a couple of things. I think it was Stanford who released, and I don't know if it was public or if they just shared it with state chiefs, but they showed all of the countries and then broke out each of the states and how we perform. So where we would rank as a state worldwide. And it goes back to an earlier point. Our states are performing, some of them at pretty significantly different levels, and are at significantly different levels in terms of driving what Todd just mentioned as one example, science of reading, not just passing policy, but strong implementation, strong overhauling of systems to ensure the needle moves. So I will just say, I found that helpful as a state to see where Indiana is compared to all of these other countries in the world. But there's no doubt, like we have to continue pushing the needle. We have to keep our foot on the gas pedal as states and as a country. And we're probably not moving fast enough. We're not moving fast enough.
Well, other countries are moving pretty fast. If that report that you reference is not public, it's being FOIA'd now, so it will be public. It will be public soon enough. Melody,
maybe I misquoted who it was from, but it was really good. Really
Melody,
good.
You're going to get the last word. And I'm going to do what you shouldn't do. I'm asking you a double barrel question. One is mine. Just quickly talk about just a little bit some of the limitations here. What can Lexiles and Quantiles not do? We talked about you need different tools. And then there's a question here in the chat. How do you make sure this doesn't end up instead of what we're talking about here? How do you prevent it from becoming tracking kids into different career paths and so forth?
Yeah, I'm going to start with that one. So, I think in particular, when we talk about career paths, I've heard that question before, because you show a student what is the basic requirements for them to enter this particular career or field that they want. And the concern is that now we're putting them into track, we're saying it. Instead, I see it as it gives information that they maybe haven't seen before and helps them to establish some goals. So I think, it's what you don't know is what's holding you back. I think there is nothing probably more discouraging than when a student or a parent plans for their child to enter into any field, whether it's the military, whether it's an electrical engineer or whatever they want, and then they get there and they're not prepared for that first year. That's discouraging. And so what we're hoping this can do is really give information that they haven't had before, to be able to help them to set some trajectories and goals. And again, Lexiles provide that growth pattern where they can see their improvement over time. So I do think we're not tracking, we're giving them information they didn't have. I think your other question, Andy, was the differences in what it can't do. That universal scale, whether it's Lexiles or Quantiles or whatever universal scale is, it's not going to eliminate differences in policy or priorities. And I think that's important, that every state continue to go down the path that they have. But what it does is it makes those differences quite visible, makes them understandable, and gives some action that they can do with that. So in doing that, it provides that foundation for transparency. And I really think the transparency leads to informed decision-making.
All right, that's fantastic. That's a great way to end it. Thank you all very much. I feel like I just got to spend just like an hour chatting with people who I like and learning from them. And so I hope people watching online have the same experience. But I really enjoyed this. I can't thank you all enough for taking time out. And Katie, for you being willing to sort of take the slings and arrows that come with that role. Melody, thank you for your support on this project and our ability to get these ideas out in the world. And Todd, thank you so much for just being absolutely tireless in an unpaid capacity on behalf of parents. We need many more like you. So thank you all very much, and thank all of you all for watching. You can learn more about our work, as I said, and through the links in the chat, and hope we see you at future ones. Thank you.